Mafia 2 Definitive Edition is a 2020 re-release originally released in 2011 by the developer/publisher 2K. Mafia 2 is a semi-open-world third-person shooter where you're put into the polished shoes of Vito Scaletta, an Italian-American gangster from the 1940s and 1950s. My elevator pitch for Mafia 2 is: while playing, you see all the expected pop cultural things from organized crime. The money, the fame, the power, etc. But along with that, you see the loss, the fear, the punishment for breaking the law. The thing that I admire most about Mafia 2 is its story and how it strikes a chord between the goods and the bads of this kind of lifestyle. Speaking of the story, I'm specifically talking about the main story for Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. I have played the DLC, included where you play as Jimmy and Joe. The only interesting story-related DLC is Joe's, and that's not much to write home about. You just experience more Mafia 2, but play as Joe while Vito is, shall we say, unavailable. And don't get me started on Jimmy, I couldn't care less about the guy. The achievements for his DLC make me angry. No, for the main story, in Mafia 2 you play as Vito Scaletta, a young man whose Italian family immigrated to the city of Empire Bay in the United States. Vito teams up with his best friend, Joe Barbaro, and starts pulling different crimes, starting out with petty robbery, but eventually escalates to joining a mafia family. The game eventually transitions from the 1940s into the 1950s, and this change brings about a drastic difference in the game. They change the music playing on the radio, people drive different vehicles, and they even dress differently. Although I don't think that's really fair because you only see the winter of the 1940s. Actually, the transition event itself has some really well-designed gameplay elements, but it's slightly spoilerish. I'll refrain from spoiling too much. Vito ends up serving time in prison. The whole set of chapters in prison are so polar opposite of the open-world game genre that some people might be confused why the game developers would even limit the player so much. Someone might think,
how could this be part of an open-world game? The whole idea of an open-world game is you wander around doing whatever you want, harassing the city of NPCs, and causing a scene whenever you want and however you choose to do so.
This is actually a super smart gameplay element, making you, the player, feel constrained while Vito is serving time in prison. You spend only a short amount of time in prison, but by the time you're out of prison, you do actually feel somewhat free. You're now able to return to the open city, driving around, stealing, and causing havoc however you see fit. As I've already said, one of the best things I admire about Mafia 2 is how it doesn't sugarcoat organized crime. Sure, the protagonist basically got all that he wanted out of life, but it's most certainly not a life I would want. There's also something to be said about the mundane tasks of driving to each mission and then driving back home from each mission. This game struck me as unique in its presentation through and through, which is exactly why I was happy to give it another playthrough when Mafia 2 Definitive Edition popped up in my Steam library. For those of you who don't know, sometimes remakes, remasters, and definitive editions show up in your Steam library when you already own the old, original version of the game. All that to say, there are times when you're having a high-speed car chase with the cops. You will have times when you have money, weapons, and influence, but you'll also have times where you'll need to restart anew because you lost it all. And you'll have boring, mundane tasks, even in a video game about the Mafia. And I think it's neat and unique among video games that I've played to date. The gameplay for Mafia 2 is rather linear. Normally, open-world games have you bouncing all over the place with other optional objectives. Mafia 2 typically doesn't give the player that many choices, making it a far more streamlined gameplay experience when it's contrasted with other open-world games. You play from a third-person, cover-based shooter perspective while in combat. You also do a fair bit of driving around in a vehicle, There is a lot of leeway for which weapon you're going to use. Personally, I find the semi-automatic pistols more sporting, whereas the fully automatic weapons make the game easier, thus unsporting. Some examples of player freedom in Mafia 2 are when you'll choose to start the next mission, what cover you'll hide behind, which vehicle you're going to drive, if you're going to buy clothes or steal them, fighting the cops, changing the plates on a vehicle, customize a vehicle's paint and rims, store a car in your collection in the garage, pick a fight with a random dude walking on the street, etc. You may find yourself in a situation where you're a bit short on cash in the game. So here are a few ways to make money in Mafia 2. Bringing cars to be demolished, bringing fancier cars to be sold at the docks, stealing from stores, and you'll sometimes get money as payment from missions, but don't rely on this method. You also lose money from missions. Scrapping and selling cars won't be available until certain main story chapters, and sometimes will become unavailable during a mission or later into the game. All this to say, there are a few key points in the game where your objective is get money, and grabbing a few dollars driving to and from work isn't a half bad idea, especially since stores restock/respawn after a chapter is complete. Wink, 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 wink. Yeah, I'm probably gonna go to hell. Wrapping up this video, the main story took me 14 hours. The thing that called me back to Mafia 2 is actually the game's atmosphere. You get used to listening to music from the 50s and 60s on the radio. The punk DJ and era-appropriate commercials, the city's style and appearance along with the pedestrians, rolling down the street in your fancy pants car, and playing a nice self-contained 10 to 15 hour video game experience. You also get the DLC with the Definitive Edition bundle, so that's nice. The DLC gives you a bit more to do for a few more hours. However, this review primarily focuses on the main story. The gameplay mechanics do carry over to the DLC though. And since replaying them, I forgot how tedious the DLC gameplay style is. Basically, each DLC drops you into the game and says,
"Hey, here are some missions to do. Go finish them all until we deem you worthy of a story-related mission where we'll award you with a cutscene."
And you just keep on chipping away at the missions until you've done them all and beaten the game. Now then, it's worth noting a thing or two about the name Definitive Edition. I didn't notice anything significantly different about Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. The characters didn't look more pretty, my computer seemed to run everything just the same, and since it just popped up in my library from previously owning Mafia 2, I'm completely indifferent to the negativity other people have with this game. However, that's not to discredit the criticism that others have levied against it. I'm reading about some people having graphical problems. I personally only ran into one graphical problem, but everything else was pretty normal for me. Some people comment on hating the 2K client, and I am there with you on that. Why everybody needs to have their own stupid game client and login is beyond annoying. I didn't realize apparently some songs have also been removed from the radio playlist. And of course, the frustration with re-releasing a game and asking for more money for an old game. Yeah, it's questionable ethics at best. That being said, I focus mainly on the game itself and tailored my review and perspective more on the game itself rather than the differences or not so differences. At least at the time of this review, you can get both Mafia 2 Classic and the Definitive Edition with one purchase on Steam. If you've never played Mafia 2, it is totally worth checking out any version that you can get a hold of. But what made this Definitive Edition definitive? I have no idea. I played because it was in my library for free, and I stayed because the atmosphere of the 40s and 50s.